Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the AmpUp webinar on managing mini-grid operations in rural communities. It takes a community. The Advancing Modern Power Through Utility Partnerships AmpUp program is a USAID-funded program centered around peer-to-peer relationships and strong practitioner and stakeholder networks to support net zero goals. AmpUp's consortium offers unique expertise, member and partner networks, and energy sector development experience to implement agile, responsive, and comprehensive support. AmpUp leverages its resources to share global performance improvement methods and practices, providing utilities with a menu of capacity building, technical assistance, and network strengthening options. Consortium members include the United States Energy Association, Arizona State University, Segura Consulting, MK Advisors, and NRECA International. Please join me in welcoming Zoraida Hoffman of NRECA International, who will moderate this webinar. Zoraida?
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Tricia. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is Zoraida Hoffman, and I will be the moderator today. And on behalf of NRECA International, welcome to our discussion titled, It Takes a Community, the second of the three-part webinar series on the challenges and opportunities to operate mini-grids in rural communities. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items and reminders. There will be an opportunity to ask our panelists questions in the last 15 to 20 minutes or so of our discussion. To do that, please use the Q&A option, not the chat box at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. We'll do our very best to respond to as many as possible. Also, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available in the coming week. 2 weeks ago, another panel shared their experiences on what it takes to operate a mini-grid and keep the lights on for the communities they serve. If you missed it, that session is now available also. Today, our panelists will cover why it's important to get support of the community to successfully operate and maintain a mini-grid. With me today, as you can see, I have panelists who are operating, implementing, and supporting community-owned mini-grids in the form of electric co-ops. First, I have Aaron Massaquoi, who joins us from Totota, Liberia. He is the general manager of the Totota Electric Cooperative, or TEC. NRC International helped establish this co-op in 2017 with the support from the U.S. Agency for International Development and members of the electric co-ops in the U.S. This co-op's solar-powered mini-grid serves 2,500 people in a town that was without power 5 years ago. Today, their operations are economically self-sufficient and is a model that could lead to more electric co-ops in Liberia. Next, joining us from Alaska in the US is Clay Copeland, the general manager and CEO of Cordova Electric Co-op. This power utility was originally owned by the municipality of Cordova, but in 1978, citizens organized and voted to form a rural electric co-op. And today it operates a mini-grid and is the sole power provider in the remote and coastal community in Alaska. Next, I have Dan Waddle, Senior Vice President for NRECA International, headquartered in Arlington, Virginia. He leads all the activities that promote co-op development and the design programs that offer access to modern electric service in developing countries. NRECA International was established more than 60 years ago with a mission to bring power to communities around the world using lessons learned from the U.S. electric co-op movement. Next, we have Doreen Voila, who is the program manager for the Zambia Electric Cooperative Development Program, or ZECDP, and she's joining us from Lusaka. ZECDP is implemented by NRECA International with support from Zambia's Rural Electrification Authority and USAID's Cooperative Development Program. The program's mandate includes increasing access to renewable electric service in multiple communities and establishing electric co-ops as viable providers of electricity service. And last but not least, we have Emily Varga, Senior Cooperative Development Advisor for USAID's Cooperative Development Program. One of her areas of interest is in empowering local communities and promoting inclusive development. We have a full house today. Welcome, everyone. So here's what we're going to do. Before we begin, we have a poll question for everyone in the audience. And I'm going to, oh, there it is. I think you should be able to see it up on your screen. And the question, I'll read it out, is what is the most important ingredient to ensure the success of a mini grid? Customer satisfaction and support, access to capital, consumer tariffs, or reliability? So if you would go ahead and make your selections. And I've been informed that hosts and panelists cannot vote, which I'm sure everybody here has an opinion. So go ahead and put in your vote, and I will wait for a few seconds to see the results. And then we'll get into the conversation. And for those of you who just joined in, again, there's a poll question for you to submit your answers to. Just take a look. The question should be popping up on your screen. And I think Trisha will pop it up once we get the results of the poll question. Ooh, I see Aaron's hand up. Give it a few seconds. Do we have a quorum, Trisha?
Yes. I
Awesome.
can end it now. We have 91% participated.
Excellent.
Okay, so I will be ending the poll now. It's last chance to put your answers in. Okay.
Let's take a look.
Share the results. Okay.
Interesting. So I encourage my panelists to take note. Customer satisfaction and reliability are top of the list. Access followed by access to capital and consumer tariffs. So take note. Maybe you can include some of those points in our discussion today. All right, so speaking of discussions, and I'm hoping Aaron is not having difficulty because we do sometimes have connectivity issues. There you go. Hi, Aaron. So Aaron, I'd like to start this conversation with you to answer the first question. And so TEC was formed about 5 or 6 years ago. And as I mentioned before, it operates a solar mini grid and it serves about 2,500 consumers. And before that, Totota didn't have power, but now the town is growing. You and I have talked about this several times. I'd like for you to share with the audience today, if you could, the role of the community there and the role of the community and the role that plays on TEC's success that you've witnessed over the last few years. Can you share that with us?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Massaquoi, and like Zurera said, I serve as the general manager for the Totota Cooperative. Okay. As it relates to the question asked, Totota is successful on few points, and one has to do with the cooperative model that we are using, which is very important. It makes everybody to own the utility, because as per the bylaws, it says that the customer are shareholders. And once you are a shareholder of a utility, you have to do all you can, to be able to see the success of that utility. The next one is the purchasing of power. You see that TEC is successful. It has to do with the purchasing of power. We see the customer always pull here, on a daily basis to be able to purchase power. That is one of the success that we have, and the willingness of the community is important, because decades there were no electricity in Totota, and in 2018 we are seeing electricity in Totota. So everybody are eager And you see, businesses are growing now because of this electricity. So everybody put themselves into it. So basically, these are the things that is behind the success of Toyota Electric Cooperative. One, like I said, the purchasing of power. Everybody own the electricity or the utility, and the willingness, to come together to discuss issues.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you, Aaron. I'm sure we're going to touch back on that again further down
yeah.
in the discussion. So Doreen, I'm gonna ask you to join us next. And the work in Zambia is just beginning, yeah? And your team has been on the ground, working in the communities, conducting outreach and awareness campaigns for the formation of electric co-ops as a viable way to bring power. So in Tatumbila, and I've enjoyed telling this story, the first electric co-op was formed earlier this year, and the solar powered mini grid will be constructed, I think, in the next year to bring power. So, what can you tell us what gives you the confidence that this community will successfully manage and operate this mini grid, and why?
Thank you, Zoraida, and I'm happy to be part of this discussion. I think I'll pick up from what Aaron has said. Aaron indicated that part of the success they are having in Liberia is because of the willingness of the community and also the willingness of people to come together. And I think we are seeing the same thing in Tatumbila. Tatumbila is in the northern part of the country, in Muchinga province, very close to Nakonde. It's about 1,000 kilometers away from the capital. But from the moment that we started engaging the people on the ground, the community on the ground, there's been a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of buy-in. We have, the team and myself have worked with the community leaders, with the residents, to first of all inform them what the electric cooperative is all about, how it can benefit them. And then there was also the process of getting a consent from the community. So we carried out a consent voting where the community was confirming that this was something that was of interest to them. And from the turnout and the vote, we found that over 99% of the people who voted actually voted for having a cooperative. So we can see that just from the enthusiasm that is on the ground, it's very evident that the people want power, and this will be a successful model. Another thing that the community has done is they went to the chief to get land for the cooperative to be built. And this land, 1 hectare land, has been provided for the mini grid that is going to be built, and this was done. Apart from that, we have worked with the community through the process of developing bylaws, which would govern the cooperative. We have also worked with them through the process of, we supported them holding a general assembly. And I need to mention that our partners through this process, so we have been working actively with the government. And our key implementing partner is the Rural Electrification Authority. We are also working with the Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprises, specifically Department of Cooperatives. We are also working with the Ministry of Energy. So our team, together with the team from the government, has been on the ground. And like I said from the onset, there's been a lot of enthusiasm. So looking at just what is happening, I think I'm confident that the mini grid, the cooperative, once it's established and the mini grid is put in place, will be successful.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing more about the project in the next year. Clay, I'll have to go to you next, and I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about this, because listening to Doreen and Aaron, it might just strike a familiar chord with you. I mean, the American Electric Co-op movement has been going in this country for such a long time, and to see what's going on in sub-Saharan Africa must be interesting from your perspective. Because Cordova, as I said before, your co-op was established when the people were not happy with the services. And so they came together and they've decided to form a co-op. and which is a similar story that we hear in many places. But your co-op, and this is 4 years ago, so it continues to grow. Members needs are still priority, and the mini grid is operating well, reliable, and those of us here can relate to the challenging landscape that you live in. So, in looking back to the history, and now as your role as the manager and CEO, how has the community and your members contributed, you think, to the longevity and the continued longevity of your success in the co-op?
Very much like Aaron and Doreen, the enthusiasm and support from the customers is so important. From the poll, the reliability and the customer service and satisfaction being the highest priorities, that was why Cordova Electric was formed. The customers really wanted to have very reliable power, and having a governance model where they actually had a direct say in as a collaborative to make decisions for where the community was moving or where the electricity was moving is what really helped the success. The cooperative model allowed them to make decisions that would have been very hard to make in other governance models. So the cooperative is founded with two big initiatives to develop hydropower as a local energy source, and also to convert overhead power lines to underground. And underground power lines are considered very expensive, but they did it anyway because we're not connected by road. We're a very remote, isolated community, and it's difficult to get help when your overhead power lines are getting knocked over by storms. So that community support has really helped us with our state government and our US government to get support, because it wasn't just a utility manager asking for support. It was letters, emails, telephone calls from our customers saying, hey, we need a hydroelectric project. We want local source of energy that's affordable. So the cooperative model, really, I don't see how we could be where we are today without that model and without the underlying support of our customers.
Thank you. Thank you, Clay. And that, that is something to look forward to, I think, Doreen and Aaron, something that you can potentially learn from. Emily, I mean, a large part of your role at USAID, at the Cooperative Development Program, is to promote this co-op model that our speakers have said many good things about so far, and to establish a better understanding of why it can help improve lives, not just in the power sector, but across all sectors. So, and USAID is currently funding ZCDP and has funded other electric co-op projects, development projects, including the Totota Electric Co-op in Liberia. So I'd like to hear why you think this model works.
Absolutely. It's a great question. It's actually something that I try to answer every day as I advocate and educate folks on the model. Cooperatives have been meeting the critical needs of their members since 1844. And in my opinion, it combines the best elements of both nonprofit and for-profit service to communities, but rooted in markets. Often in international development, we search for technological innovations to solve complex problems, but cooperatives in many ways are social innovations. When done right, bottom up, organically, they can operate for decades, centuries even, evolving and growing with the communities in which they serve. We've invested a lot of research in cooperatives to try to understand why they work, and we've actually learned that individuals join cooperatives for economic reasons, but they actually stay for social ones. So you see that, those two elements of for-profit and nonprofit combined, which is a reason why they're serving the needs of over 1 billion households today. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. And just for the latecomers, I've already received 2 questions from the Q&A. My reminder to everybody here is if you have any questions that we'll address later on in this conversation, please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat, and we'll get to these in a little bit. Dan, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. So you've got a lot of experience working with governments and different private entities who have invested in mini-grids. I'd like to hear from you about the state of mini-grids in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's regarded as a sensible solution to power up rural communities. We've heard that several times. But many of these mini grids, either publicly or privately owned, haven't been sustainable from a financial standpoint. So can you share with us a little bit about what, in your experience, what types of challenges they face, and how would that be different from a community or co-op owned mini grid?
Okay, well, thank you, Sarita, and thank you for inviting me to participate in the panel. I'd say that in our experience working with rural communities and isolated areas, the biggest challenge in electrification is just that, to manage a generation distribution system with limited resources. So whether it's in the early days of my experience in Latin America, we worked with several hundred isolated diesel-driven mini grids. Comparing those to grid-tied rural utilities, the isolated mini grids had a much more difficult time because they had to manage the generation technology and distribution technology as well as run a business. I don't think that the challenges are any different for solar diesel hybrid mini grids. The technology is more reliable. It's more robust now than it was 30, 40 years ago, without question. But the economic pressures are the same. And I'm not sure that I would characterize the state of mini grids in sub-Saharan Africa as that many or most are failing. Some are failing. And I think that there's likely a specific story with each challenge that mini grid operators face. Some will be economic. We have had the mini grids that we have financed and put into operation, including the mini grid in Totota, have had pretty significant technological challenges. I think that the most important ingredient is to ensure that the business is operating well, to ensure that the basic functions of billing and collection are managed as efficiently and effectively as possible, and to ensure that there's adequate technical expertise on site. That's the biggest challenge for any rural utility, whether it's a cooperative or a privately owned utility. I'd say that when we are initiating new rural utility enterprises, that's what we focus on first and foremost.
Thank you, Dan. I'd like to bring us back to some of the challenges, and Dan spoke a little bit about that too. Emily, if I could go to you first, how, in your view, how are community-owned enterprises, like in this case, electric co-ops, right, in a better position to overcome some of these challenges, whether it's operations, technical? What do you think? Share with us a little bit on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just wanted to highlight the point Aaron brought up about joint ownership, and Doreen brought up about establishing community buy-in. Cooperatives are formed by individuals who pool their resources and to mitigate risk. And by nature, they're more resilient enterprises, and they're adaptive. There's this consistent feedback loop that exists between members and leadership, typically through what's called an annual General Assembly, where members vote on their priorities, whether it be social or economic. And we've seen firsthand the resilience of cooperatives in response to COVID-19, where local governments and nonprofits could not respond. We saw cooperatives were handing out food aid, setting up hand washing stations, ensuring that there was consistent information, reliable messaging about the pandemic to their members. So of course, risk mitigation strategies, especially climate resilience, needs to be central to long-term planning. But this business model in particular is more responsive to members' needs because they have this consistent feedback loops, which allow them to overcome anticipated challenges. And that's what we've seen in our work. Thanks.
I'd like to stick with this issue of resilience for a bit, because I know that's a hot topic. I know in the US especially. Does anybody else want to address the question of resilience with the co-op model? Any other examples anybody want to share? before I move on? Yes, Clay.
I would just mention that we live in a very dynamic environment where we have frequent earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, superstorms where we'll get several feet of snow in a day, as much as a foot of rain in a day. And that was part of the drive behind converting to underground power lines, so that when we have a snowpocalypse event and get 30 feet of snow, even though people have to crawl in and out of their second-story windows and the roads aren't passable, everybody's lights stayed on. So that's really an important element, is that reliability that people touched on in the poll.
Thank you. Anybody else before I move on resilience and the co-op model? All right. Okay, so Erin, I'd like to go back to you if I could. And Emily already said a lot of the, the why, right? Why the co-op model works. But I'd like to get some examples from you being on the ground as the general manager of a co-op in Totota. Can you give us an example of how this co-op, the community-owned co-op model, has helped you overcome the challenges you face on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, thank you. The model is very important, and initially, because of the model, we saw the community coming together, and then to be able to provide, the land that we are using currently, where the grid is built. Many times, like one example, we have a fire outbreak at the time on our genset, the permanent genset, and then quickly the shareholders came together, and then where we have to decide quickly to be able to go for loan generator, which of course we are using today. So the model is actually important because in terms of difficulties, these very people will come together, then they will make an informed decision, and these decisions will actually help, with the growth of the cooperative. Another thing again, whenever, like right now, Liberia now we are going through what we call financial crisis. So you will see that the cooperative will come together and then discuss the tariff, where we want for this cooperative to stand. If the tariff is a little bit lower, do you think that this utility will stand? No. So will it be good for us to step it up a bit? Yes. And then everybody would agree to it, and then we'll step it up a bit to meet the demand of the society or the demand of Toyota. So the model is actually important. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. Doreen, tell us, because of all, we talked about the activities that are going on in Tatumbila. It's established, and I hope we'll be able to touch on this a little bit a little later. There are other things happening in different regions now, similar to what is going on, what went on in Tatumbila. Can you tell us what's next? What are you and your team doing next to make sure that Tatumbila and potentially the other co-ops that will be established, what they have to be successful and sustainable? Because this program is not going to be forever, right? So when it ends, we want to make sure that these co-ops are still viable and they can continue on. So what can you share with us on that?
Yeah. So you're right. I think so one of the things that we're doing moving forward is to ensure that the sustainability of this whole initiative. The cooperative model is not new in Zambia. It's been there for a very long time. We've had agricultural cooperatives, financial cooperatives, but the aspect of electrical cooperatives is something new. It's more innovative. And so for the model to even be sustainable and what we're doing in Tatumbila to be sustainable, it's important that we provide technical assistance and also we build capacity in the different stakeholders. So for Tatumbila, mentioned that we had a general assembly. So once the cooperative was formed, we had a general assembly where a board of directors and 9 directors. We have 3 females and 6 males have been appointed. These directors are supposed to help in overseeing a management team who will be employed to look after to oversee the activities of the utility. It's important that these community members are also given the needed skills, especially in governance issues that they need. And apart from that, as I have said, within Zambia, the electric cooperative model is relatively new. So it's also important that other stakeholders from the government who are supporting this process are also equipped with the relevant tools and skills to support this process going forward. So what we have planned now is a governance training for the board of directors. We have also planned to work with the Department of Cooperatives and also with Ministry of Energy and REA, that is the Rural Electrification Authority, so that they are part of the training. So we'll do a training of trainers. That way we will have qualified and trained people within the government who, for the next cooperative that will be formed, will be able to train the board. So once we do the training of trainers, we have a resource which is being provided through the program to work with these trained people to then train the board. So that way we will ensure that even as the ZECDP program comes to an end, the skills that are required to sustain this process are still there, both within the government and also within the cooperative. So some of those are some of the next steps that we are looking at. Another thing that we did, we realized that gender and social inclusion is a very, very important part of the whole program. And it's important to understand the dynamics and to understand the cultural issues that are on the ground to ensure that even as we move forward, everybody is part of the process. Are not leaving anybody behind. So what we did was to do a gender baseline assessment, and the findings from that assessment are really going to help us in ensuring that we are implementing a gender sensitive, we are undertaking a gender sensitive approach. There are several important aspects that have come out, the need for us to consider some cultural aspects, to ensure that we are working and also taking into consideration some of the issues on the ground so that everybody is included, both male, female, youth, and whoever needs to be part of the process. So those are some of the next steps that we are doing going forward.
That's a lot of work. And I'm gonna have to put you on the spot for a little bit, if you don't mind, because this topic really brings up the kind of relationships that NRECA International still maintains with some of the co-ops that we've worked with for a very long time. And if you could just sort of follow up on what Doreen was mentioning about the kind of training, the sharing of knowledge, can you share a little bit about what NRECA International has done to continue the relationships to make sure that the co-ops that we've worked with remain sustainable, either through our own trainings or bringing in members from the US co-ops to help with the governance or safety trainings? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So what we've learned over the years is that where there are opportunities to embed training programs with local agencies, like in the case of Zambia with the Rural Electrification Authority, that's the most effective avenue to ensure that the new rural utilities have the access to the resources they need, both training and technical assistance, to address issues as they arise. But we know, like any business, electric cooperatives are going to face challenges. In some cases, the challenges have to do with expansion. Like if you talk to Aaron about his biggest issue right now, he wants to expand the geographic scope of the cooperative to a larger footprint in Tota. In other cases, there may be issues with governance. There may be issues with taking on new technological challenges and finding the external resources to address those. What we have done over the years, when we work with rural electrification agencies, we provide the training resources they need to then pass on those resources to local rural utilities, cooperatives and non-cooperatives. Where those resources don't exist, where an electrification agency doesn't exist, we have offered training resources directly ourselves. We don't have a lot of funding to do so, so we have to be selective about how that's how the training services are offered. However, over the past 60 years, we've worked with over 300 rural cooperatives and probably another 50 or more non-cooperative utilities. So we have a lot of training resources in our knowledge bank. It's one of the reasons why NRECA International exists is to provide those services and access to resources to rural utilities. So it's something that's extremely important to us. The training resources that we offer cover every aspect of utility operation and management, from governance training to training executives to training linemen and commercial technicians. All of the training resources you would find in the United States or in Western Europe exist in our knowledge base.
Thank you. And I think that's a very important point to make, is that, when you help establish a co-op, it doesn't end right there. We try to make sure, and I see Emily nodding, if it's true. I mean, we try to make sure that they have what they need to continue to succeed.
I'd add one more comment. You say that if you walk into a China store, if you break it, you own it. Well, when you start a rural utility, if you build it, you have to own it. You have to own it for some period of time. To me, it's a very serious undertaking. You are creating a public service for that community, and you can't simply build it and then walk away. You have to ensure that the community members know how to operate a rural utility. And I'd like to make one other very important observation. There's an assumption, and I think it's a very natural assumption, that rural people, because they don't have access to the educational resources that people in urban areas have, that they can't manage public enterprises. That's simply not true, right? People are intelligent everywhere throughout the world, but they just need access to training and to technical assistance. And it's really that building that human capital, to me, is the most important thing an electrification institution can do. That's our focus. And while we also we're more of an engineering team than we are anything else, we focus on building human capital.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Dan. Clay, I have to go back to you on this, since we're talking about the co-op and ownership, and I wonder if you have any insight about how co-ops like the one that Aaron is running and the new co-op in Tatumbila in Zambia, do you have any thoughts about how they can learn from your co-op experience and how they might overcome some challenges that you might face? I mean, I know we're talking about 2 different locations in 2 different continents and so many differences, but there have to be some similarities that we can connect, and how you might be able to offer some insight to help them.
That's a great question, Zoraida. And, when we founded the cooperative, we had very much very developing world conditions, a very unreliable grid, very little technology, and in struggling to have the human resources, as Dan mentioned, to manage it. But take hope in that you can jump to the latest technology. One of the great advantages that Aaron and Dwayne will have is they have the ability to start with a very advanced and very modern cooperative. we were able to jump 3 or 4 generations of technology to become one of the most automated and advanced utilities in the country, in the US, because we had so far to go. I just wanted to add one other thing in the discussion that we didn't discuss beforehand, but one element of cooperatives that's really important is the business incubator concept. And Aaron touched on this just a little bit, but when we hire a lot of our local businesses to do work for the cooperative. When we're building a hydroelectric project, all the welding and cement work and digging, when we build underground lines. So when we hire local contractors, they're not just working for a utility, they're building their own electric system. So there's a very high sense of ownership, and they really lean in. And I just wanted to mention that one real advantage of cooperative is that the support you get not only from the customers, but from the local businesses and the business community that you help create and support, but that also does work for you.
Thank you for that point. Does anybody else want to add to that? Because yeah, Aaron, you touched on some of that a little bit, and I brought up I mean, visually, go to Totota now, it's very different than what it looked like just 6-7 years ago when I was there. I assume that's correct. So Aaron, would you like to comment a little bit about the relationship between the businesses and the co-op and how that's a really important thing?
Yeah, thank you. When it comes to the businesses in Totota, initially, businesses were like very poor when there were no electricity. You have fewer businesses. There were not many. You know how many businesses, but with the electricity in Totota, now we are seeing a lot of businesses, and people are leaving from the urban area coming to Totota. We are seeing clinics. People are being hospital. As I speak to you, currently we have 2 additional clinics that is under construction. In fact, one is completed and the other one is still under construction because of the electricity. So because of this electricity in Totota, many people are coming in, and it is actually a boost for us because the businesses will help support the growth of the utility or of the cooperative. So, I mean, the relationship there is cordial because we are providing them electricity, and at the same time, they too are giving us, money so that we can be able to run the utility. So, on the overall, the relationship there is cordial, and businesses are actually improving. Educational wise, we see schools. Oh, that is one of the greater things I love to talk about. At first, we used to see many of our people leaving from Totota going to Morovia to go and do their work, their educational work, even laboratory work. You get sick, you have to run to Banga, or you have to go to Kakata or Morovia to be able to do your laboratory work. But right now, those things are done right here in Totota, and it is because of the electricity. So, I mean, there is a cordial relationship between us.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
I look forward to getting more updates. Again, I think if I were to go back to Totota, I was there a few years ago, and it probably looks very different now than it did then. I see a lot of questions coming in, and I'm not going to do it now, but I think I'm going to put in some of these questions here in a little bit. Clay, I got to go back to you, and Doreen, I might ask you the same thing. So I have to ask you, what is the biggest challenge for you to operate a mini grid? I mean, the biggest challenge. I know there are probably plenty, but name what the one that keeps you awake at night.
Really our challenge is kind of financial. I mean, we are in the US where you have a lot of developed businesses and communities, and we compete in global markets with our seafood processing industry. So the cost of power is very important. When we built our hydroelectric plant to be 2/3 hydro, that power, we can produce power for about 1/10 of the cost of diesel fuel. And that really grew our seafood processing industry. And once the community becomes prosperous, you can solve social problems. We can invest in our hospital, in our schools, and so forth. But 30% of our power is still produced with diesel fuel. And the one challenge we're trying to do is to get to 100% renewable and further reduce, especially our winter costs when our hydros aren't available, to make the electricity more affordable and to be able to have to provide heating with the electricity with air source heat pumps and new technologies. So we still struggle with to try to keep our rates as low as possible.
So it's rates, it's tariffs, as I think we asked during the poll question. I'm going to bring in one question from the audience because it ties in with the financial side of the business here and how it ties in with the co-op development work that that Dan and the team have done. And I'm sure Emily's very familiar with this too. I think we're all sort of familiar with this. And I'm going to read the question. One of the challenges with mini grids is finding investment or capital. Co-ops in the U.S. have benefited from decades of low interest loans from the government, the RUS loans, and we know this. What is the financing source for co-ops like the Liberian co-op mini grid? And what are the prospects of scaling similar finance in sub-Saharan Africa? I mean, we all know that there are, more than 600 million people that still don't have electricity access. So how can we, let's talk about this. How can we scale up with low interest financing to do this? Dan, do you want to take this first and then I'll pass it down the line?
Yeah, I'd say that the answer is great question. There aren't any easy solutions right now, and especially when you think about it, if you step back and look at the question that is being asked, when you're starting a rural utility, if you're a mini grid developer, you have mini grid developers hopefully have bigger businesses, they have multiple investments, and they if they're a sound company, they can borrow on their balance sheet. If you're starting a new rural utility that's going to be owned by the rural community, they don't have a balance sheet, they don't have a business, they don't have the prerequisites that are necessary to qualify for financing. The utility in Tatota was financed by NRECA International. Contributions that we made directly. We also had a partner, Bandera Cooperative from Texas, just outside of San Antonio, that provided a big part of that cost. I won't say that it was an investment. I would say that we were making an investment in the community, but it was really a donation. So that's a big part of the challenge that I see going forward. Is how can we leverage financing, which is being made available to government entities, electrification agencies, as well as to mini grid developers. The issue that I see is that governments are investing through national utilities, which have their own challenges in reaching urban consumers. The national utilities in sub-Saharan Africa haven't been particularly successful in expanding rural electrification very effectively. Mini grid developers, on the other hand, have to invest where they can achieve a sufficient rate of return on their investment. And that means in the higher income, larger population centers compared to large cities. These are larger villages. Well, that leaves a very significant gap between areas that can be served by national utilities and by mini grid developers, as well as solar home system operators. And that's where we think cooperatives can play a significant role. Cooperatives have traditionally engaged in business where there's a market failure. when there aren't other sources of capital or means to address demand. They basically are demand aggregators, meaning that they bring together people who can leverage investment. But that leaves open the question of where is that capital going to come from? So this is a question that we've been working on in Zambia as well as in several other countries. I can't say that we have any ready answers as of yet, but it is a question that we're very much interested in.
Yeah, I agree. And I've heard this question asked. In fact, some of the questions that have come in touch on the financial and the investment side as well. Does anybody else want to add to that before I move to the next thing?
I would only add that another differentiator with a cooperative business model is from day one, you're aggregating resources from your members through the form of member equity and dues, which is different from traditional models, but completely agree with Dan that it really depends on the maturity level of the cooperative, where you are in the process to determine what financing model you'll try to attract. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. I'm gonna pivot a little bit back to the governance, or not the governance, excuse me, the relationship that some of these emerging co-ops have with the government of the country. And Doreen, you mentioned earlier, and I know this too, that we can't do this without the Rural Electrification Authority in Zambia. So I'd like to hear your thoughts, based on the work that you've done, is that how important is this relationship with government entities to create these mini grids, to power the communities, and how has that been for you and for the project?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think for the cooperative model to be successful, it's also important that there's an enabling environment to support that. We have been very fortunate with this project. Like I said, our main implementing partner is the Rural Electrification Authority. We're working very closely with them. We've had a lot of support. Apart from that, even other government ministries, the Department of Cooperatives, Ministry of Energy. So for the ministries, if you're looking at aspects of policy and ensuring that there's the correct policy to support the existence and sustainability of the electric cooperative, it's very important that that support is there. Dan has also already indicated the aspect of the Rural Electrification Authority and the kind of work that is needed to sustain, because their mandate is really electrification in these rural areas. The electric cooperative model is just one aspect, one type of model that the government is currently would use to reach these communities, but there are other models. But the fact that we have the support and we are able to move forward, I think that will also help in ensuring that once these cooperatives are established, they are also sustainable, because they go throughout the whole governance structure, the governance, and also ensuring that these utilities operate and expand even to other communities. There has to be buy-in from the whole, from both the government and also the infrastructure on the ground. So the existence of an enabling environment for the existence, for the establishment, and for the sustainability of these cooperatives is very, very important. And that is something that we are seeing.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm looking at the questions, and I see there, because we've talked about the Intotota and of course the Tatumbila in Zambia, and we're moving to other communities in Zambia. And so the question that's come in is about how do these communities get selected? And the question here says, do communities need to bring certain prerequisites, capital, structures? Are there cases where you would say it wouldn't make sense for the community to follow the co-op model? And I do know that some co-op model, to your point, Doreen, is not the only option. And Dan, I think you can also say that NRECA International has gone into many countries to help bring power, but the co-op model doesn't always work, or it's not possible, I should say. So I'll I guess I'll start with you, Dan. Is how how do these communities get selected?
Well, like any business, I mean, cooperative utilities have to operate as functioning, manageable businesses. And in a case of NRECA International, we start by doing business plans. So that what we know is that there is a minimum scale that cooperatives have to achieve to be able to commercialize a sufficient amount of energy to cover operating costs. And that's one of the challenges I see with cooperative mini grids. If we're looking at very small mini grids, and in sub-Saharan Africa, some mini grids are as small as 25 consumers. But that's tiny, right? So when we look at establishing mini grid utilities, doing one that is 100, 200 consumers in terms of operating the business is just not big enough. So if we look at mini grid cooperatives, it makes much more sense to me to follow a model where there are multiple communities that are managed under a single business umbrella, in the same way that mini grid developers operate. They develop multiple mini grids under in a common service territory, and they provide common resources or administrative resources and commercial management resources to all of the mini grids in that particular area under a single umbrella. That's how we see the cooperative model being used for mini grid development. I think that when we look at starting new businesses, it's all a matter of ensuring that the communities get the service they need at an affordable price. And that's the other side of this. If you the smaller the business, the smaller the base of consumers over which operating costs have to be managed. So if it's too small, the cost of power is going to be relatively high, and it could reach the point of being unaffordable. So those are the balances that you have to consider when you're looking at rural utilities, whether it's a cooperative business model or a private business model. It's the same calculus. The only point where you can look at differentiation is in the rate of return on investment. Cooperatives require a very modest margin, whereas investment entities require a much higher margin.
Thank you. And to add to that too, though, when we go into these communities, and Aaron and Doreen, and Doreen, I might point this question to you, and Aaron, you can follow up too, is that, and I think at one point when you and I spoke, Doreen, you mentioned that the people, the communities, and once the team has established that this can actually be financially sustainable from a density standpoint or from a business standpoint, the community has to be willing and to be part of this. And this is why we're having this discussion today. So in your discussions with your team, and you too, Aaron, and what you've seen, how the reaction of the people, the willingness, how important is that have you seen in the communities and the participation of the communities? What are some of the examples that you can share?
No, you're right. The willingness of the community is very important. We have one community in the eastern part of the country where we will also be working. They were supposed to get electricity some 3 years ago. When they knew that power was coming, they had already put in service connections even before they had power. So we see the kind of enthusiasm and the kind of eagerness people have to have power. Similarly, in Tatumbila, right from the onset, the community has actually demonstrated that they are willing throughout the whole process. I had talked about the different processes which actually lead up to having an electric cooperative registered. We go through the mobilization process where you're talking to the community leaders, talking to the residents. We go through a process of awareness within the community through radio programs. We then go through a process of the consent voting. We go through the process of helping the community come up with the bylaws, the General Assembly ultimately having the cooperative registered. So we see that throughout that process, we are carrying the community together, and the community is actually demonstrating their willingness to be part of this process. And this is very important even for ownership, because for any community enterprise to be successful, it's really owned by the people within the community. So if from the onset they're owning that process, for me, that's a demonstration that even as when power comes, they want to own it, and they want to make sure that it works. So given this community that we're working with in Tatumbila, the other communities also in the eastern part of the country where we have worked, we've had similar responses, and just the eagerness of people saying, look, we want power. Going back to Tatumbila, so far we have 160 people who have registered and have fully paid up the membership fee and are ready to receive. So, and this is a rural area in a remote part of the country where you'd expect people don't have much in terms of finances, but they have seen the importance of this, and they have actually paid towards being part of this to show that they are willing and would like the electricity to be in their communities.
Thank you. And I think Aaron has something to add to that. Am I right, Aaron?
Yes. Zureda, just what is that Dori from Zambia? It's just what she said. In Totota, the willingness of the people is actually important. And what makes it important? One, security. Recall where our grid is built is almost at the outskirts of the town. And being that the people are willing, to be part of this cooperative, they always advise, their children not to go around there. And even if someone is going around the grid, someone say, hey, whistleblower, hey, don't go there, because everybody is surviving from that grid. On the other point, you see that because of the enthusiasm of the current membership, other people who are not benefiting from this utility, they run to the office on a daily basis. They want to be connected. They want to be part. So the willingness of the people is actually important. It's important, to in any mini grid developing. You got to take that as very, very key. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Clay, was I right to see your hand up at some point?
Yes, thank you. And we were a very small utility that had to compete with hundreds of cooperatives across the country and dozens of cooperatives around the state, and have been extremely successful in getting funding. And willingness is a word that kind of is kind of a passive word, where we will accept this, but that's not what I'm seeing from Aaron and Dwayne. And words like enthusiasm and eagerness really speak to passion. And if a government only has the funding to fund one energy system, they are going to gravitate towards the ones that are passionate, the ones that are say, we need energy, we deserve energy, we're going to make this happen, we just need your help. Those are the ones that are going to come to the front of the line. And then after you get some funding and support, make that project successful and share that success back to the organizations, then that makes the cooperative model successful. It makes them more willing to invest more in communities and cooperatives.
Thank you for that. And certainly we've seen this happen from, how many has it been, Dan? I think we've created, the NRECA International has helped establish about 250 electric co-ops around the world. and we still have relationships with them. And I don't want to repeat this, but certainly that's true. Thank you for that, Clay. I have another question I want to ask. This is from the audience. And Dan, I think this might be back at you, about willingness to pay surveys. And the question is, did any of the panelists do willingness to pay surveys to learn what tariff levels would be acceptable? And I think I know the answer to this, but Dan, could you speak to this, please?
Well, I can't say that we created willingness to pay surveys. They were actually created by Procter and Gamble back in the, I think, 1960s, but they certainly helped normalize them in electrification projects in the early 80s, together with the World Bank. We have done, we don't call them willingness to pay surveys anymore, because the willingness to pay surveys typically or prototypically ask people what they would like to pay for a particular service. So we found it to be a pretty poor indicator of what the actual ability to pay is. So what we do is perform energy expenditure surveys to find out what people are spending now on their energy resources. So we found that that's the best indicator of what they'll spend tomorrow when they receive electricity service. So yes, we do them extensively. There's a pretty well-developed science on how to design them and how to implement them. We've done these surveys dating back to, I think, 1986, when we developed the format, and we do them for every project that we undertake. They're very important, not just from the perspective of understanding what spending patterns are, but we also gather demographic data, so we have a better understanding of what the economic realities are. And from a monitoring and impact analysis perspective, that's extremely important to collect that baseline information.
Thank you, Dan. Emily, I'd like to bring you in on this now. And maybe you've been hearing, and you know most of this because you're a big supporter of the co-op model, I know. So we were talking about lasting impact, and we have witnessed co-ops have been around for hundreds of years. But do you have a favorite example or project or of how co-op model has resulted in this long-lasting impact that we all hope to see with all the co-ops that we work with?
Thanks. It's difficult to pick a favorite because I am an admirer of cooperatives of all shapes and sizes, and that's exactly how they are formed, all different shapes and sizes. But I'd say in the rural electric space, the Philippines is one of my favorite examples in terms of scale. More than 56 million people are being served by rural electrics in that country. There's deep and sustained commitment to their communities. And I think and I was in middle school, several decades ago when NRECA International and USAID, invested in the rural cooperative movement there. And today, I think there's something like 119 rural electrics there operating. The largest, Batangas Electric Cooperative, and Clay, you made a mention of clean and renewable energy, but Batangas is now 100% renewable and servicing over 300,000 households, which is just incredible to me. And we think a lot about this legacy impact, and when we've made investments in communities decades ago, where are they today? And this is just one of those examples. And not only in terms of scale and reliability are they impressive, but it's also an enabling and supportive environment. And I hope that the building blocks that we're investing in today in other countries can follow similar footprints to what we've seen in the Philippines. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. All right, I'm going to go through the questions that the audience, because we have about 20 minutes, a little less than that. And one of the questions goes back to, I see it as community engagement and community participation in the co-op. And I'd like to hear, well, a member of the audience would like to hear about but how, so the community elects, as we know, in the co-op. This just happened in Tatumbila, in Zambia, and Aaron, you've been through this. In the community elects the board of directors and approves the bylaws and so on and so forth. What other activities or what other mechanisms can be incorporated within the co-op to increase this enthusiasm, to increase this community participation in the oversight of the co-op? Because I think that's important. Doreen or Aaron? Aaron, I'll start with you. I think I saw you. Oh wait, if we try,
Okay.
Hang on, Clay. I'll get to you first. I'm gonna let Aaron get to this first, and then I'll move to you, Clay. Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, another thing that we need to stress in the cooperative development has to do with the share of dividend. Though with this, if you encourage dividend on our annual basis, you stand to create more let's say the awareness. You stand to get many people to come in, because at the back of their mind they will say, well, at the end of the year at least we'll get something. Another thing that you need to have whenever you are creating or developing a cooperative, you have to take in consideration the assessment. Assessment is very important. Like for Totota, the assessment was made great. Let me applaud NRECA. And initially, NRECA started with 188 customers. And then we took it from there from 188 to now 386. Now, the grade was actually built for 400 customers. So if I talk about assessment, there where I'm going. The grade was built for 400 customers, just for lighting in homes. But then, because of the importance of the electricity, we are seeing, businesses coming in. So whenever you and these businesses are coming in, they are using more energy. So that cannot allow us to reach the 400, customer that was initially designed by NRECA. So assessment is actually important, where you have to go and see the nearby town or the nearby communities within that area that you want to build your grid. Other than that, like for us in Totota, you get to know that the grid will become so, the capacity of the grid will be smaller, and then many people will keep coming to you, and then that want to be connected, and then your capacity cannot, and in a run that may cause some maybe public uprising. Yes, it may likely bring public uprising, because people need the electricity, and they are just nearby to you, and they are seeing the grid, they are seeing other people benefiting from the electricity, but they are not benefiting. So what mechanism do we use, or do we put in place that will allow these people to be connected to get electricity? So assessment is key.
Okay.
Is key. Yeah,
Thank you. Go ahead, Clay.
Oh, that's exactly one of the successes I was talking about. It's a good problem that there's been such quick uptake and such value on electricity that people are connecting so quickly, and that's a story to share, and it's a success that can help you grow your grid. But We have our annual meeting every year. That's a great way to communicate with our customers. We also hold an annual customer appreciation, just a luncheon where we serve a lunch to all the customers, and our staff can walk around and share some of the things we're working on, help them see more of what the cooperative's doing. And we also engage in the schools a lot. We teach electrical safety in our fourth grade classroom, and those students go home and talk to their parents, and it helps communicate what the cooperative is doing as you're teaching safety. And many of those young people now work for the cooperative because they got excited about it at a very early age. And to Aaron's point, assessment, even after being a cooperative for 40 years, the customer surveys that we send out are very important to us. To get feedback from the customers, to know that we want to hear that feedback, are all important for customer satisfaction.
Thank you. Doreen, go ahead.
So the Zambia program is, the cooperative in Zambia is new, and we are looking forward to having a lot more. But one of the beauty about the ZECDP is really a demonstration of the viability of the electric cooperatives. And it's also, it's creating an opportunity to learn a lot of lessons, and also implement those lessons and to make corrections. And so one of the good things is that we have the different cooperatives models already working, like in Liberia, in Alaska, and in other countries where we can actually learn from. But I think what has been good, coming back to your question in terms of what else can be done for engagement, it's just to harness these lessons that we are learning as we move forward, to ensure that we are integrating them in our implementation project, so that as we now establish the other cooperatives, these lessons, we keep doing it better every time, because then we are learning. And I think that has been from the time we started to where we are, as we are even moving on to the next set of for the next cooperative in the eastern part of the country. And as we look forward to even implementing the next 3, we will know that we will have gathered a wealth of information and lessons that will keep us learning and improving until we reach such a time where we are a few decades behind compared to other countries. But at least there are a lot of lessons that we will keep learning. And I think these are the lessons that we'll keep integrating in these communities, in the different institutions that are supporting the communities. And I think that is what will help the program going forward.
And to Clay's point earlier, the advantage is that you are using current technology, not technology from 20 years ago. So Emily, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I mentioned earlier the importance of feedback loops for the resilience of these business models. And there's certainly a bare minimum that we see universally across cooperatives globally, of like, we have the annual General Assembly, but as each cooperative is as unique as its members and the communities in which they serve, so are these feedback loops, whether it's a WhatsApp group or a survey, a satisfaction survey, and again, as unique as their members. But when you increase transparency, you also increase accountability, and then you increase participation. And that's what I think we all want to see. Thanks.
And that's trust, basically.
Absolutely.
Right? To make
Absolutely.
it all happen. I'm going to ask one more question. Some of these questions do repeat themselves, but or rather the same. I'm just going to look through them real quick. So, and this may not be an easy question to answer, just like the question I asked and Dan responded, it is a good question and there really isn't a good response. But we've seen and we know, and those like Doreen, actually almost every one of us here in the room, seen the success of electric co-ops, over the last 50, 60 years. And we've seen it in parts of Asia, in South Central America. I mean, the biggest electric co-op or the biggest power provider in Bolivia is an electric co-op. So there's been a lot of success over the years. So we haven't seen as fast of an uptake in sub-Saharan Africa. Generally, what do you think needs to happen to make it the next big growth in electric co-ops in sub-Saharan Africa? Dan?
Yeah, I'd say that I don't think that we're going to see national electrification programs invest through electric co-ops in sub-Saharan Africa. And there's, the reason for that is that the national utilities are cover a lot of territory in most cases, and there's confidence in them. Even in cases where the utilities may have run into financial difficulties. The financial difficulties that most of the utilities have run into have been politically generated by forcing highly subsidized tariffs on utilities that haven't been financed by the national governments. That doesn't mean that there's not a significant role to play for electric co-ops. And again, I think it's a question of the recognition that the electrification programs that are underway now are reaching a point where they're not going to move much further in terms of their penetration into marginalized areas. So it's a matter of recognizing that there multiple business models are required. There are a few cases in the world where electric co-ops have played the primary role in rural electrification. That's not going to be the case in sub-Saharan Africa. I do think that there is a role for them to play. For that to happen, there has to be a recognition of the value of electric co-ops. Most importantly, there has to be a pathway to financing them. I don't see that condition precedent being satisfied as of yet, and that's something I think that's going to take much more advocacy and much more knowledge sharing to happen.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to add to that? No? Oh, go ahead.
I would just add that, philanthropies are very interested in social return on investments. And sometimes there's opportunities, especially when a cooperative can deliver social value to their community, whether it's a growth of business, independence, improve health and local welfare. That's kind of an alternate path that you can take. And also, I just wanted to mention, that the NRECA and the Cooperative Research Network is a great resource, and they're technical experts in the U.S. Department of Energy. But what you find is that really cooperatives working directly with each other, especially to share their failures, as Dwayne was talking about, those other cooperatives become your best resource and help you avoid some of the mistakes that sister cooperatives, we call them, make, and also recognize and pursue some of the successes. So the cooperative network is great because you have a lot of organizations that have the same business model, same challenges and opportunities, and they can work together between communities, even between countries, to electrify and advance.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know we do get a lot of support and participation from the U.S. Electric Co-op movement to the work that we do in different countries in many forms. Dan, did you want to add to that?
With regard to philanthropies?
Oh, no, I just saw that you unmuted yourself and I thought you had something to add, but if there's something you want to add, go ahead.
No, I guess I would say that in terms of philanthropic investment in rural infrastructure, yes, there is some interest. We haven't seen an interest specifically in investing through cooperative models yet, or the cooperative business model. It could be that there just hasn't been enough discussion with them. We have certainly approached several philanthropic institutions. We have our own fundraising activity, but what I would say is that when you look at the need to finance rural utilities in sub-Saharan Africa is probably about $200 billion, right? It's a big number across the board. We look at the need for electrification investment. We've done, I think, about a dozen national electrification plans, and each one has, the investment requirements range from a low of about $2 billion up to $8 billion for each program. So there's a lot of money needed. There's a relatively small amount of money which has been allocated thus far through national governments and through private institutions. The need is great, and the resources which have been allocated are much more modest.
Thank you. All right. It's almost time to close this out, and before I do any of you have anything else you want to add to the conversation? No? Are we good?
We just there is a question that I don't think that we've addressed, and maybe
Yes.
I can say a few words about it. The question of technological challenges. If we're talking about mini grid challenges, I think the challenges are pretty straightforward. The principal issues I see is that some of the mini grid architectures which have been applied aren't properly grounded. So we see problems emanating from lightning strikes, and that principally has to do with damage to the controls that are used in the mini grids, and in some cases going down into the battery systems. Battery systems themselves, it's the most important or the most expensive part of a mini grid generation system, and it's also, in my view, the most sensitive. We've had significant issues with battery systems and mini grids we've installed in Haiti, in Liberia, and in Uganda. When we talk about any mini grid technology, any generation technology, generation technologies have matured in recent years, but they're not without problems. So all I would say is that whenever one designs a mini grid, you have to expect problems to occur and to be ready to address them. And that means, ensuring that you have a very well developed relationship with your supplier, and ensuring that you have the proper guarantees in place when things go bad.
Thank you, Dan. All right, we have 2 minutes, and I think I have to close this out. This is your last chance to do a 30-second final statement. Anybody?
Okay, yeah.
You have 30 seconds, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you. Dan said it all. However, another challenge that I would like to stress here, like for Toyota, has to do with access to finance. To be able to get finance from government and even in a bank to do other work, is a little bit difficult. In a bank here, we see that the interest rate is so high. Like in some bank we say 25%, some 30%, which is very high. And this is actually challenging. And then the next challenge, like Dan said, has to do with the equipment. We are using a modern equipment, and all the equipment need to be in the cloud, as well the data need to be in the cloud. And sometimes the internet fails, especially in Toyota, the internet fails. And if that happens, sometimes, over the week, we catch some tough times. So basically, these are some of the challenges that we go through. Thank you so much. We have many, but let us stick to it because time.
That was 1 minute, not 30, but that's good. All right, I have to close this out because technology will shut down on us if I don't. So before I end the session, though, I'd like to remind that the third and final webinar of this 3-part series will be on November 8th, and it's titled "It's a Business," and much of what will be discussed we touched on also here a little bit today. We'll have another panel that will discuss how they've reduced commercial losses, increase efficiency in challenging environments, and implementing innovative technology solutions. It sounds like this might be able to help some of our panelists here today. So I'd like to thank all of you who've come and joined us from many different parts of the world. for taking part in, taking the time to share all this knowledge and experience with us. Thank you, USAID, and thank you, USEA, for making this possible. And thank you, of course, to all the attendees for being here today. Thank you again, everybody. And see you on November 8th.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.